would you say it's important to have a therapist that is like culture informed?
But the reality of the situation, a lot of Black people, a lot of Asian people at the hands of the mental health system are not being supported after George Floyd. But what's happening? Has there been any improvement? Has there been any changes? Let's talk about that. Blind spots, right? Human beings, we have blind spots. So what I'm saying is, if you feel like things are not that bad, right, that might be the case. Maybe it genuinely is not that bad. Fine. Do you want it to get worse?
Please stop all this woke agenda.
It's political correctness gone mad.
Sorry, Thought Police.
You're such a snowflake.
Surely all lives matter.
Did those sound familiar? Here on You Can't Say Anything Anymore, we unpack the nuances of these comments and bring sidelined lived experiences to the forefront. Brought to you by Diversifying Group.
Hi everyone, welcome to this month's podcast. I'm your podcast host. My name is Naomi. My pronouns are she, they. I'm a little bit sick this month, so if my voice sounds a bit funny, that's probably why. But I'm very excited for this month and this specifically for this guest. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please, you are speaking on You Can't Say Anything More, the podcast, and if you'd like to just, take away, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Ngozi Cadmus. I'm a mental health and leadership expert, a psychotherapist, a social worker, and a business strategist.
Fantastic. So if we just get started, just sort of a little bit interesting. Obviously, mental health is super, super important. I think that cannot be stressed enough, especially after the last 2 years.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely things. So could you just tell us a little bit about your journey towards like your career in therapy and mental health? Like what originally interested you? How did you get started for our listeners?
Okay, so I think as like most therapists, depending on how or where they are when they when they start their training, of course, usually our trauma kind of leads us into it. But it's usually being curious. You're curious about, why you are the way you are, why people are the way they are, and that was my reason, and it was my level of curiosity. I completed my social work degree, and social work is amazing. You get to really understand the world and the social, biological kind of ways of being and social structures. But I really wanted to delve a little bit deeper into the unconscious mind and understand more about attachments and relationships and the whole unconscious. So that kind of led me to psychotherapy. But then, of course, within psychotherapy, my own therapy, you realize and you look back and go, oh, okay, my own trauma, the things that I went through, my mental health probably tacitly was pushing me in this direction, but I wasn't consciously aware. It wasn't like, oh, because I've had my mental health difficulties, I'm now going to be a psychotherapist. Some people are more conscious of that, and they make a kind of conscious decision, and some people are just like, I want to do therapy. And then it's within therapy, when you're going through your own personal therapy and in your training, you begin to be aware that, okay, my childhood experiences has enabled me to go down this path to really want to understand, obviously, why I am the way I am. So why are others the way they are, and how can I guess help people thrive rather than live, I guess in trauma, rather than live in their defenses and unhealthy maladaptive processes. So yeah, that was kind of what brought me into the career therapy, and I guess a combination of everything is that I'm really passionate in helping particularly people from the Black and Asian background, because of the stigma and the unique barriers that we face into accessing psychological therapy and being psychologically safe in their workplaces. Because if we're not psychologically safe, if our employers are not looking after our mental well-being, we're not going to thrive, we're not going to be productive, we're not going to be able to contribute effectively, in our workplaces. And we spend more time at work, more time at school. We spend more time outside of our house, really, from the age of 5 than we do at home. So it's really important that the environments that we spend most of our time in, other than the weekends, and some people work on the weekends as well, they are environments that they enable us rather than constrain us.
I love all of that. That was fantastic. I think especially, myself and other people, we've been seeing lately a lot of buzzwords from therapy, from counseling kind of pop up in the sort of general public, like attachment, like avoidant, gaslighting, all of these words, and especially trauma. Those have been I've been seeing those words a lot on my feed, and I've been seeing them be discussed a lot more in media, which I think is really interesting. I don't know if you have a kind of any thoughts about the kind of where it's kind of going, because I do feel like people are starting to become more open about that, and especially since you spoke about the kind of barriers that have been existing for many people of color. I do feel like a lot of the conversations are really starting to happen, and some sort of wheels are starting to turn.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I had a conversation with another podcast host about, like, I guess, Insta therapy, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I say that, you know, it could be both. And I think the positive things about when I say Insta therapy, it just means like pop culture has essentially taken hold of words like attachment, trauma, narcissism, gaslighting, what do you call it, and essentially made it very digestible, anxiety and depression. So you will hear people who probably 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago would never utilize these words within their lexicon now say it like they're quite confident in how they kind of say, oh, that person's narcissist, or that person's got narcissistic traits, or that person, it's like, wait, who made you a psychiatrist? Who made you a clinical psychologist? But so there's negative things that in that way, because obviously people start trying to diagnose people and are really quick to kind of use labels that can be quite damaging. However, the positive thing I would say, there's several positive things, but is that increasing awareness, right? When psychology terms, these are terms that have been used since 1950s, 40s, 30s, even yet before that. These are old terms. You know, detachment theory came from, Bowlby, back in the 1930s onwards. So now in the 21st century, the layperson is catching on to these terms. It means that what was in the psychological expert kind of domain is now filtering out to the lay people, and bringing awareness, because people are trying to understand why is trauma, why is sugar honey iced tea being passed on from generation to generation? Why do I enter a relationship and come out with more baggage and enter into another one? Why is that occurring? So yeah, the positive thing, and also people want to explain what we call phenomena. If I'm talking to you about something I know that you're doing and you're making me feel crazy, so you're gaslighting me, I need a term. Gaslit is a really good term to explain that phenomena. It's a really good term to explain the experiences that, myself as a Black woman, yourself as an Asian woman, probably have experienced once or twice or many times in our working careers, when we are saying, I felt that person maybe was, there was a racial thing. If something was going on, and we're like, are you sure? Really? But maybe it's like, wait. Why are you giving me my interpretation of the experience that I had with this person? You weren't even in the room, right? Okay, you're gaslighting me. So it's basically explaining terms that you see, or when you watch reality TV and you literally see a person talk badly about somebody, right? You can talk about like the housewives, and then in the person go, no, why do you think that? Who's talking about you? And you're thinking, oh my God, like, if only they can see the cameras show them talking about the person, and that person knows they're being talked about, but everybody denies it and makes them feel crazy until the end of the show, and they watch it back and go, really? Gaslight. So these are terms that I guess what I'll say the lay people, everyday people, want to understand the experiences that they are having with people, so that they can feel like, wow, validated. Oh, this is what it means. It's actually a word. There actually is meaning attached to this feeling that I'm having. So I think to a degree it can be a good thing. Obviously, there's always pros and cons to it. But I think overall, in terms of your question, I think, yes, mental health awareness is slowly but surely becoming more known to the general public.
I love that. I think yeah, reality TV is definitely one of the places we've been seeing those words pop up so much more. Like you said, like especially those, behind the scenes, like, oh, this is what they said on reality TV and things. And I think it was interesting that you highlighted the kind of pros and cons of the terminology, which is obviously, I'm sure, very specific, very researched for many years, and then it kind of being diluted and people just using it casually, maybe not with the right specific context, maybe not with the exact situations, but you were saying sometimes it can be very helpful, especially in situations like workplaces. You gave the example about often when somebody, say a person of color or a person with disabilities, they explain an experience, and then they feel that other person is not accepting that reality. They feel kind of denied, and I think it's good that there's a word to fill in for that, really.
Yes, exactly.
Things. Yeah, so I guess I just wanted to kind of ask a bit about, you did touch on it a little bit and things, and I liked that you said about how it really started with you like questioning yourself and things. And I guess I'm sure a lot of people have been through that as well in the pandemic in different ways and things.
Mm.
But kind of I wanted to ask a bit about like some of the challenges for like how mental health differs for like people of color and things, and how those kind of barriers kind of come into play.
Yeah, I guess, if we really want to go there, particularly in this country, I'd like to be specific into the UK, but there will be very much similarities, unfortunately, in a lot of Western countries. But in the 60s, 70s, 80s, historically, the way in which mental health, and I use mental health to also parallel police, any kind of institution, essentially. And before, Black people have always been in this country, we know that. But in terms of like the amount of Black people that came by the Windrush, and then in the 80s and 90s, a lot of Africans from West Africa came, the mass kind of migration. We've come to a white country. We can say that. We can confidently say that England still is very much, and UK still is a white country. So the institutions, predominantly every single person would most likely be white and predominantly males before, women started to come into these institutions. So I think it's good to put really that reality, right? Because everyone's going to come in be part of a different spectrum. That it's not institutional racist. It's not, irrespective if you don't think it is or not. We can all say that historically, this country, everybody was white that worked in these institutions. So therefore, when people massively migrated, be it from the Windrush, they invited to come, or however they came to this country, migration in itself is a very traumatic experience, going from one culture to another. And then when you get here, you're not accepted, you're not appreciated, you're not valued. You found that, particularly with the Caribbeans and the Caribbean men, a lot of them were not only locked up in prisons, they were locked up in the mental health institutions, told that they were schizophrenic. True or untrue, the point is there was a lot of distrust that was created very early on when it came to supposedly caring professions. The mental health is meant to be a place where you get treatment, you get support. But the way in which people are being treated is not being supportive, and when people are not necessarily, going in and coming out to be, effective members of society, right? So let's say 40 years on, 50 years on, 60 years on, it's still the same, really. We still have a situation where the mental health system for a lot of Black people, a lot of Asian people, a lot of mixed heritage people, essentially, feel that this distrustful of this mental health system. Is it really there to support me? Am I just going to get a label and then be labeled, get medication, and that's it, and be put back right into society? Now, that's just if I'm talking about that. I haven't talked about the other factors that contribute, the socioeconomic factors that contribute, the racial factors that contribute, the trauma that contributes into why people of color maybe develop certain diagnosis at supposedly a higher rate than other races, right? But I'm just talking about, if we really want to be objective, because some people want to argue points, we can objectively see at a particular point in time, Black people specifically were not treated well in these institutions. So when a community is not treated well by the police, so by law enforcement, by mental health support, and mental health, by social services, by every institution, supposedly by school, right? Followed by school, then society as well. Pubs, just society as well. Every part of society you can think of was hostile to Black people, was hostile to Irish people, was hostile and still is, to people with disabilities. It's not going to be that of a surprise that people are still quite distrustful of mental health services, all right? And the fact that the labels were so quick to be attached, oh, you've got schizophrenia, you've got this, you've got that. And some of these labels were so damaging to a person's aspirations, back in the day, maybe even still now to a degree, still hard. You being labeled schizophrenia, bipolar, even depression, anxiety at a time could literally potentially ruin your chances, of a successful career, of a successful, life, good quality of life. You're getting pumped with medication, and medication in of itself, particularly the old generation of antipsychotics, had so much side effects. Again, that in itself might be dealing with your mental stuff, but then you're physically having certain side effects. So there's so much in the mental health system that I think we need to really acknowledge. Now you have a situation that 40, 60, 80, 20 years on, things have not really changed in terms of the statistics. There was a paper I saw 20 years ago that said Black people are 4 times more likely to be sectioned in hospital, be detained in hospital. It's still Black people are 4 times more likely, to be taken to hospital. So the question is, what has changed? What has occurred? A lot of Black people have come into the mental health system, like myself. I actually do section people. And in certain boroughs, I section a lot of people that look like me. Am I then part of the system enabling it, or am I part of the system challenging it? You've got to ask yourself those questions when you are, quote unquote, part of the system. So the distrust of services is one thing. So if you distrust services, when you are struggling, you're not going to go to that. Let me give you a poignant example. When I was at the height of my depression, I've never gone to my GP for anything other than physical health stuff, mainly because if I use my isolated incident, my GP was very horrible. His father was so sweet, but once the son took over, he was very cruel. The last time I saw him, he literally said to me, "Oh, I remember you. You used to get bullied." Like, he did it in a very sarcastic way, because I couldn't speak. I used to get really anxious coming to him because he was just really rude. And I think that I brought my mum, and then he was like, why's your mum here? Don't speak for her. Let her speak. Oh yeah, he just started to write off my history, like, so insensitively. And this is the very reason why I would never have gone to him when I was in a height depression, because I don't trust him. And even certain things that I've needed, I've had to fight for the things that I needed. When I went to be tested for sickle cell, I had to fight to be tested, because he was like, "Oh, do you really need it?" I'm like, "Yes, I really needed this test. I need to find out what my thing is." So that's an isolated incident. I can't even. He was a Pakistani or no, maybe not Pakistani, maybe Indian doctor. But I can't say there was any racial, couldn't be, I don't know. But what I'm saying is that that's an isolated incident. I just didn't like his personality, let alone a system that is very hostile to people that look like myself, right? So that's a small incident. So you've got distrust of services. Then you've also got stigma within the communities themselves. So there's things within our communities. I know it happens, we've got in the Asian community, in the Black community, about mental health and illnesses. It's not understood. It's embarrassing, it's shaming, it's demonic. People don't understand it. So when you're going through it, it's hide it away, let's not tell anybody that our son is struggling, so nobody ever sees, "Oh, how's your son? Oh, he's gone off to America to study. He's right downstairs." But nobody wants to show him, because we're embarrassed that we've got somebody who isn't, quote unquote, whatever success is in that defining that family, is not doing well, is hearing voices, is delusional, is this, that. You've got contributing factors, of course, so you've got stigma within the family, you've got distrust, and you've got the fact that when you go in, when you ask for help, the system is so overclogged, the system is so overloaded that you don't get the help that you ask for. I literally, several instances can tell you of particularly Black men who supposedly historically do not engage, they're the hard to reach group in the mental health system, are reaching out and are told you're basically not unwell enough. You're not unwell enough, right?
Ridiculous.
And the reason why they're being told that, though it sounds quite harsh, and you think, "Oh my God," being a practitioner in that, I understand. We're saying that we don't have the capacity, so you have to be extremely unwell. You have to be basically running around naked for me to help you, because if we help everybody who was just unwell, then you got to think about it as the person who had 30 people on my case. That's 30 individuals, 30 families. That in itself is too much for one person to handle. So I couldn't take 100. I couldn't work with 100 people, let alone 30, which I was working with, or 30 plus people. So the system is clogged up. So when you want help, you can't get help. So what happens? We only get at the point of crisis, because one, we don't ask for help when we're just really feeling bad. It's got to go really bad, and usually we don't even ask for help. It's so obvious to everybody because I'm walking around naked, or somebody hears me screaming in the house and calls the police. We come to help at the point of crisis, or we come to help when maybe we get involved in criminal activities, and then realize that someone's got mentally unwell. So I'm trying to give stories to just anecdotally show this is the system that we have. Again, it's not all bad. There are amazing things that the system does, but the reality of the situation, a lot of Black people, a lot of Asian people at the hands of the mental health system are not being supported because of these factors, and also many more factors.
Do you think there's also a case of many Black, Asian, and people from different backgrounds, they feel the pressure that if they say oh, I'm not doing so well, or I'm really anxious about this, that then they'll be perceived as like the angry Black woman or the angry Asian or the, I don't know, is that also have a role to play in, as well as being kind of feeling the weight of
Ooh.
having to represent your own kind of community, and then like not wanting to be that one that's like pulling everyone else down, even though that's not how it works, but just feeling the pressure of that.
So no, I'll say the flip reverse. I think because
Oh, okay.
of the fact that as Asian people, as Black people within our culture, we're taught to be strong, to keep on going, to keep on moving, admitting that we need help is a sign of weakness. And the reality of the situation, a lot of us are carers, I know it's different in certain Asian backgrounds and even certain African backgrounds, but typically sometimes we're our parents' pensions, right? Our parents have come to this country, they've gotten to a certain level, and they want us to surpass that, but they haven't been able to give us an inheritance. So we have to essentially ensure that they are looked after, and we are our future families looked after.
Yeah,
so if you now say
absolutely.
that you're depressed, you're having a breakdown, who's going to look after everybody? If you go, who's looking after everybody? Even if you go for 2-3 weeks, you're thinking, who's going to look after my mum? Who's going to look after my father? Who's going to look after my siblings? Who's going to look after my family? So it's actually the reverse. It's also, would you be seen? Would you be neglected? Would you be, because they say that 1 in 5 Black women die of, childbirth. And there's a lot of research into that. But one of the key things that we're seeing in the lady Q, the girl Q in Hackney, is young Black kids are adultified quite early on. So similarly, when I've had to express that I'm struggling, I don't feel like people take me seriously. It's like I have to cry. I have to physically show you I'm dying. Now you take me seriously. But if someone else, maybe if a white person said I'm struggling, it's like, oh, you're really struggling. It's like, do I have to, I don't know, what do I have to do to show you that when I'm saying I'm struggling, because I'll just say I'm struggling, but maybe the person there doesn't interpret all of the cues in my face, my body language. They need to see more from me than they would from a white person or non-Black person to interpret the same kind of level of this is serious. Do you understand what I mean? So it's not necessarily because we're a strong Black woman that if we say it, it does the reverse. It's the reverse. It's because we are perceived as the strong Black woman.
Right.
When we need to say to people, when we finally get the courage to tell people, I'm actually also vulnerable, I'm actually also need help, is that I've got to empty up the atty for you to see me, or it's only when it gets really, really bad I'm taken seriously, and that's some of the research that's coming out with the childbirth. It's like a Black mother can be saying, I'm struggling, and it's like, oh, you can do it. What do you mean? I'm telling you I'm struggling. What more do you want me to show you that I need an epidural, I need help? And it's like, until the vitals start showing and all the things happen, and you go, I've been telling you this for the last 10 hours of my labor. That's the situation that we kind of get. And it happens also within the community as well. It happens within, and I can imagine it happens within the Asian community as well, that it can take a lot for people to believe you within your own community. I need help because you're always a strong person. That's why they say check on your strong friends. But that kind of phenomenon is something that I think as Black and Asian people we experience as a group of people, right? Because people are not aware of, you got to think about it, maybe our facial expressions. Maybe they see us as quite harsh, right? They see Black people as quite harsh. Our facial expression is quite harsh. So when we're saying to you that we're really in pain, maybe they need to see tears coming out of my eye to believe that. But I may not cry. I might just tell you I'm in pain. That should be enough for you to believe me. Sometimes it isn't enough. Whereas in another case, it might be enough for maybe a white woman to say I'm in pain, and people kind of respond. So yeah, that's why I thought the question was actually quite reversed, but it could be. I'm not denying that question might be for some people as well.
No, I like the points that you brought up. I thought that was very interesting, and I think that you spoke a lot about the kind of I guess hyper masculinization of specifically Black women, and how their vulnerability has been removed, which has been a really important topic that a lot of people have been speaking about lately, which is great. And I think you spoke about how that kind of plays here with getting access to mental health, and you were saying that a lot of the times people are speaking and they're saying I'm struggling, and it feels as if that's not enough and that you need more proof. And yet, this is the same for many different cultures as well. Sometimes in many cultures it's not considered polite to be showing expressions on your face, to be showing, overt emotions, overt crying. You're supposed to say it in a calm way, in a calm manner, and express yourself quite succinctly. And that does contrast with kind of what we think of in the West as being like, if you're really upset, you should be crying. If you're grieving, you should be crying, and you should be, you know, quite chaotic. And if you're really happy, you should be smiling and jumping up and down and things. And oh, here we are. I saw a bit of a. I don't know if you got any points about that.
Yeah,
there.
no. So what's interesting, and another flip reverse, right? Particularly like maybe West African culture. I can't talk for Africa. Different regions are very different. Particularly Nigerian culture, right? We can be very expressive. So some of the things that you do find is that if I'm in front of maybe someone at my mother's age, from Nigeria, and I'm, in a mental health act assessment, so we're considering whether we should, admit them into a psychiatric ward against their will or not. They could be highly expressive, right? And that's normal to me. So, but then maybe the other professionals who are white, who are Asian, might be wondering, might think, oh, that person is what we call libel, but that just basically means very like up and down in emotion. It's like, no, that's nothing to do with their mental health. So that's just a cultural thing. They're just being very expressive, right? And that's another kind of interpretation of
That's so interesting.
Again, a young black boy, for example, might be moving his fingers like, just stereotypically, right? Not every young black boy does that, but just stereotypically maybe come from a particular area. So he's talking in a certain way, right? And then somebody might say he's waving his hands quite aggressively. He's like, no, he's just waving his hands because that's how he talks. Do you know what I mean? Or sometimes I've had a lot of young black boys who are actually inexpressive because, like they've got to be guarded, they've got to show that they're hard. So you get very guarded. Well, yeah, they are guarded, but they're not guarded because of their mental health. They're guarded because they don't trust us. Like, it's actually a normal reaction. We've brought it into the house with police. They're not going to tell us what we want us to hear because they don't trust us. It's not to do with they are guarded, like it's not as a result of their mental health disorders. As a result of they don't trust the authorities in front of them. So irrespective of their mental health needs at that moment, they're guarded. So these are some of the things as mental health professionals, you encounter. And it's funny because, again, it's not necessarily just a white thing. It's within the institution because a lot of the doctors that I work with actually are Asian. So it's also within Asian and Black cultures, that misunderstandings that are there, I find quite interesting because even though we are both minorities, we know that there are prejudices against each other. So when maybe it's an Asian person I'm assessing, and I'm a Black person, or the other way round, how we interpret each other is also quite interesting because we come from different norms and different values as well, though there could be quite a lot of similarities. But yeah, I wanted to just add that in certain African cultures, expression is quite natural. And then, but in the Western world, for them, it might be a bit too much. So they start going, oh, this person is really overly emotional. It's like, well, no, actually, that's quite a normal reaction. They're not being overly emotional. They're being normal, when something good happens, my mum jumps up and down and she dances, maybe by culture, it might just be like, oh, I'm so happy, right? But that's not abnormal. That's a normal reaction, but maybe to another person might be like, oh, that's a bit much. So yeah, but I just thought that was quite interesting on your point.
I love that. I mean, thank you so much for describing your experience to our listeners. I mean, I think that's so cute of your mom. That sounds really nice.
Yes.
And I think you touched on a really important point as well between Black and Asian communities, just the sort of although, like you said, they're both minorities within the UK, they just face such different stereotypes and they have come from very different cultural sort of ideologies and things, and there can be sometimes a clash and difficulty in understanding each other and interpreting each other. And I think that you touched on a really interesting point about the whole thing you were saying that for example, you gave the example of Nigerian culture. People can be seen as quite vivacious, lively, which is what I would use, but I guess as you explained, sometimes people could see that as like overly emotional and sort of over the top and a bit too much and things. And I think that's a very interesting point. I guess would you say then it's kind of important that, because you were speaking about different kind of experiences there, to have a therapist that is informed about all these different modes? Because you were saying a lot of the therapists you work with are Asian as well, and sort of would you say it's important to have a therapist that is like culture informed about these different cultural sort of nuances and ways of communicating?
I'm going to be quite controversial because when I really deeped your question, I would say no and yes, because I'm a Black therapist, but I'm also, I call myself a philosopher and anthropologist. I like to understand culture. So when I meet people, I sometimes do, but most people don't take it offensively because they can tell. I ask the most stupidest question because I want to understand your culture, your specific culture, how you see it, because how you see it might be different to how another Chinese person or Singaporean person or Lao person, I know about the Laos. People are like, oh my God, you know about, yes, I know about different countries in Asia, not just the ones that we all kind of know, right? So there's similarities and differences. I watch a lot of Asian, I'm using Asia big, but I watch a lot of different kind of countries from Asia content because I really like to understand. So there's even like a podcast that talks about Asian dynamics and I just thought it was so interesting to hear the similarity but also the differences. So I personally think it's impossible, me as a Black person, to know. I'm saying this, me as a Nigerian British person, to know maybe how a Kenyan, because Kenyans, East Africans,
East Africa
are quite different to West Africans, and we talk about the differences, right? Same as South Africans and the same as the North African in terms of the Arabic, and then Central Africa. So no, I'm not going to know all of those nuances, nor am I going to know all of the Caribbean nuances, no, I'm not going to know all of the South American or African American or the Aborigines in Asia and Australia. But then there are similarities. As a Black person, we might feel more comfortable with a Black person in general, right? And the same as an Asian person. I think it's about the willingness to understand and to educate yourself, and not just rely on the person in front of you, the client, to educate you, but also if the client is willing to educate. Now, some clients don't want to. Like, for example, my therapist is white. Though I wanted a Black therapist, that was a long story. I ended up with my therapist, who I absolutely love. But I actually did enjoy teaching her my culture because it helped me analyze my culture. So when she asked me questions, I would then think about it, because I'm thinking about not only culturally, but my family, because my family is also different culturally, because I grew up in a single parent household, and it's an Igbo, I don't know how it is now, but back in the day, as an Igbo woman, that was very odd, because when I meet a lot of Igbo children like myself, they just assume my father must be around. So when I tell them, they're shocked, because it's whether the mother and father are getting on, the father is in the home. So to not have a father, not have an Igbo father in the home, actually is quite shocking to a lot of people. So my experience as a Nigerian Igbo child growing up in the UK would be different. I only grew up with my mum. I didn't grow up with my father. I didn't grow up back home. So I enjoyed breaking things down from my purview. I enjoyed breaking things down from my faith to her so she could understand it. However, some people don't want that. Some people want you to understand certain nuances, and I get that, because sometimes in the midst of your trauma, in the midst of distress, I ain't got time to break down why my mother tells me to get the belt. You know what I mean? I don't want you to go, social services abuse is like, oh, that's what happens in certain households. The parent would make the child get the weapon of choice to beat them, right? Is a thing that we understand, whether rightly or wrongly, where you sit on that. But we could understand that, rather than the person's face make you go, oh my God, let me break it down. She did, look, she didn't overbeat me, all of this different stuff. So I think it's really about being culturally informed, culturally relative. If we just said, oh, just be informed about Black culture, just be informed about white culture, Asian culture, what does that mean? There's so many countries within that continent, right? So I just don't think anyone can be that informed. But I think a person can say, okay, if I've got a Chinese person, what language do you speak? Cantonese or Mandarin? Or what part of China are you from? Are you from, are you Hong Kong? Are you mainland? Okay, then do a bit of research and ask questions and say, look, I just want to make sure that I understand, are you Buddhist? Are you Christian? Are you neither? Like, what is that? So I get a sense, but say, look, I will make mistakes. I will ask clumsy questions, and please just, let me know. But I also will educate myself as well, because it's not just for you to educate me, it's for me to get an understanding. So I would say it's about being willing and doing it, maybe overall, just get a sense of the differences, Asians, Africans, all of that. You can't go to every single country, like how many countries in the world, but when you get a specific client in front of you, educate yourself as much as possible, but then ask them, because what you've learned might be different in their household. And not to stereotype and to generalize, So I think that's important. But I think it's just important to kind of just push back and say, it's just, I personally don't think as a therapist, I'm assuming that a non-Black or Asian therapist is got like a what do you call it, anthropology of every kind of country in the world and is trying to understand all the norms and values. Like, it's just not possible. However, have a general sense of certain differences, certain religious differences as well. But even if you know even if you know that, right? For example, I know I had a friend who mentioned, and she's Muslim, she wears a hijab. And it was important for her to, have another Muslim therapist because, when she's been to a non-Muslim therapist, doesn't even always have to be a white therapist, but a non-Muslim therapist, the therapist might say, just take off your hijab. And it's like, huh? Oh, wait a minute. It's more complicated than that,
Oh dear.
whereas a Muslim therapist wouldn't say that, would understand the importance that you attach to that, to your hijab, but also trying to help you, how do you express yourself authentically within, your religion that you might find is whatever. So yes, having a person that culturally or racially, resembles you is important for many things. It's like, I've got a wig on, right? Yeah, for your listeners, for those that watch, I'm wearing a wig, right? But a lot of times in my sessions, I've got my bonnet on, right? And I know that when I wear my bonnet and I'm working with a lot of Black clients, they love it because it's like, oh my God, like you're being you. Like I ain't did my hair, I ain't got my hair done. I can just, put my bonnet and not feel I'm looking unprofessional or not feel I'm looking not done. It's like, I don't think someone in their bonnet is not dressed up. It's just doing our hair can take effort and time. So why would I want to do all of that if I'm going to be my own boss? So somebody else from a different culture might be like, okay.
I mean, how's that any different from someone wearing a head wrap?
Exactly.
Like a non-Black person wearing a head wrap or wearing a scarf around the head. How's that different?
Exactly. That might, yeah. So a non-Black person wearing a head wrap might be that's their outfit going out for the day, right? They're going out, and it's like, no, this is me. I ain't going out, but I'm dressed up. Exactly. And somebody might interpret, because it happened to me, like I wear my bonnet and like, oh, you're not being ready, you're not ready. I'm like, I am. I am ready. I'm dressed up. I just ain't done my hair. I don't need to do my hair because I'm not going physically out, but I've bathed, I've showered, I've eaten my breakfast, I'm ready for the day. Whereas a Black person wouldn't ask me that question because they would understand what that means instantly. And that's a Black person usually from any country that's Black. So there are certain things that irrespective of what country you're from, we get just because it's like a thing that we just get, like a symbol that we kind of understand. So a long-winded way just to show your audience there's so many different nuances. I just don't want your audience to just be like, because like, for example, I'm with a white therapist, and yes, I did want a Black therapist. And when I went to meet my Black therapist that I wanted, she was like the epitome of what I thought the therapist needed to be. She was everything that I wanted to be. I didn't get on with her. The message I didn't get over, I didn't click. I felt like she was cold, and she isn't. That was my experience because I've got other people that work with her and love her, but I found her cold, and she told me to take off my shoes, and I thought that's just a typical kind of therapy kind of thing. Take off your shoes, sit down, and we just sat there, and I felt so uncomfortable. And being like my first time in therapy, I honestly just I felt like it was a bit harsh. And then when I met my therapist and my current one, she was leaning back. I didn't take off my shoes. She was like, I'm white, middle class, you're Black. Let's talk about it. I was like, oh, I like her.
Yeah.
And she's very idiosyncratic, and she fit my personality. She comes at me hard. I come at her hard as well sometimes. And I liked that. I didn't leave feeling bad, but I just left feeling confused because I was like, I want a Black therapist. I want. And I chose her. I chose my gut. I said, you know what? I know what I want. I know I culturally want someone to resemble me, but the person that I thought did, I just felt missed by her. But the person that doesn't resemble me, literally class-wise and race-wise and age-wise, that way older than me, at my grandma's age, I felt seen by her. And I've been with her, 8-9 years on.
I mean, that's fantastic. I love that. I think you brought up such interesting points about no person can be the one-stop encyclopedia for every culture, every nuance. I mean, that's just, I love that.
I love how you summarize. Like the audience members, she is a brilliant summarizer. I went like a whole 5-minute thing and she just said in like one sentence. No one person can be an encyclopedia, full stop. It's basically what I'm trying to say.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that, listeners. And I love that you brought up the specifics as well, because you're absolutely right. Your experiences, what you spoke about being a Nigerian Igbo woman, specifically from like a single parent household, it's going to be so different from, say, other Nigerian women who are, say, from a Yoruba background. It's totally different.
About Yoruba, okay.
Of course. And different religions within Nigeria, like a lot of people are Muslim and Christian. They're so different and have very different experiences. And then, for example, for myself, like I'm Chinese, but I'm like from the mainland, so that's quite different from a lot of people from the UK, from Hong Kong. And then like my specific Chinese ethnicity is like Han Chinese, which is different from like Teochew or like Hui or things like that. So all of those other things. So I think that you touched on a really interesting point about it's very specific. We all have our own individual cultures and like individual family cultures, which you kind of touched on about specifically your family. I really liked that, and that it's, and you was rounding up by saying that your therapist, it wasn't actually somebody that resembled you, and you went in and you were looking for, okay, I'm going to have this therapist, they're going to be like me, blah 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 blah, and then actually you didn't end up clicking. And it's a sense that, and you said that this therapist made you feel comfortable because she was like, I'm white middle class and blah 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 and things, let's talk and things. And but it's about, I guess, mutual respect, willingness to learn and things. And I guess, for example, for a personal anecdote, I've only ever had one Asian therapist in my life. All my other therapists have been white and things, and there's been varying degrees of different experiences that I've had, for example. But I kind of I guess I kind of resonate with what you said on a personal level as well, because I don't necessarily believe that it needs to be all the same. I think that's absolutely fine if people do want to have someone, as you gave the example with was it your friend who wants a Muslim therapist and things like that. And you said, and I think you gave the example as well about the bonnet, which was really important as well, because it's there are, of course, individual kind of like symbols, iconography of different groups that, just like you said, are universal experiences and things. And it's absolutely fine if people want to have a therapist that shares that or things like that. But I think what you picked up on was the idea about willingness to learn, which I thought was really, really interesting.
And just to kind of flip it, I love how you talked about, like, I think this is probably the first time I'm hearing about Han, and that, what? There's like, if I didn't know this.
Yeah, like in Nigeria, there's different ethnicities in China as well. There's so many, and there's like different, like, and even in Taiwan, there's like native Taiwanese people who are actually more closely related to Southeast Asians than Chinese people. So yeah, they all have different languages, and different like some of them have different writing systems. So I'm actually Han Chinese, but I'm also like technically I'm like Shanghainese as well. I don't, it's a very long story, but things. So there's different like regions and things like that, and yeah, I think that's it's interesting. And also like there's I mean, I think what we spoke about as well is just like different family cultures. I mean, it's not like, okay, you can't blanket like every Nigerian family is going to be sitting down eating indomie and eating jollof rice. You know what I mean? That's just not how it is. You know what I mean? That's just,
He knows. He knows. Our best kept secret.
Indomie.
Don't forget the malt as well.
Of
Even though
course.
some Nigerians that don't like malt, are you really Nigerian though? That is the question.
I mean, I love it and things, but I think that you touched on such interesting points about that, and just about the and also about the fact that we do have our limitations, and some people might come to you because they think, actually, I would really like a Black therapist, maybe a Nigerian therapist specifically, and things like that. But there's also limitations. We are all human. We can't like know every single nuance about every single community ever.
Yeah. It's just not possible.
Exactly, and things. But I love the fact that you were saying it's about willingness to learn.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what's important, and I think that's important in anything, in the whole anti-racism, especially at work, for example, because I do a lot of diversity and inclusion work, particularly using data to inform businesses where their gaps are and how we can support them in terms of the mental well-being of their Black and Asian and mixed heritage staff, and also including the representation. It's willingness to learn, right? It's willingness. Like, I can't fault your willingness. Now, your execution, we can talk about that. But right? But at least you're willing, then that's the starting point. Be willing. If employees are willing to be diverse and inclusive, make it psychologically safe to people want to belong, and also build equity. But the issue is the execution, and obviously there's some employees that are not willing at all. But willingness alone is not going to sort out the issues. You've got to execute. You've got to collaborate, and you've got to employ data and find out what's going on. You did a diversity and inclusive initiative 2 years ago after George Floyd, but what's happening? Has there been any improvement? Has there been any changes? Let's talk about that. So, but yeah, I think willingness is really important in a therapy room. Willingness is really important, with the leaders showing the employees that we are willing to listen to what you have been saying and to actually begin to implement, put our resources into how we can execute some of the ideas and questions and thoughts that has been, put to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess what my kind of question would be kind of next would be about, we spoke a lot about the workplace as well as how can people get started on like taking care of their mental health, like at work or at home? You know, what kind of advice would you give to our listeners who want to get started on that?
So I think first it's about, if you are, let's imagine you just applied for a job. Really, I know we always do, but definitely read the contract, read what is provided you, in terms of your learning development, your HR. 'Cause HR and learning development, L&D, are usually the people that are your well-being. They usually are the people that will have something. So that's what you should do when you start a job. Now, if you're in the job, go back to that. And then if you got your, sometimes you got your local intranet, if you work in a thing, really scour and look, what basically are your employee benefits? Do you have any employee benefits? Do you have an employment assistance program, which is usually the area that's in charge with your well-being, right? And if you do, and if you are a person of color, how likely is that EAP service going to provide a potential therapist of color, a potential coach of color, a potential mentor of color? So it's finding out what is currently there in existence. And really, if you can, push on making sure that there is something there. But as you're doing that, you got to focus on your own mental well-being. So probably do focus on yourself first and then go back and go, wait a minute, what's going on? You ain't got anything there. I want to champion this, because you got to focus on yourself first. So if there isn't anything at work, then you've got to seek out, right? You've got to go outside of work and essentially seek out your own mental well-being. Of course, my service, Frontline Therapist, is out there. There's Barton, BAATN, and a number of services out there if you wanting a Black, Asian, or a person of color as a therapist. And then there are other generic services. If you just want help, whatever, then they are there, right? Just like counseling services, usually you will find something in your local area. But I would definitely say, if there isn't, speak to your HR, go straight to HR and start having conversations. I would even, if you're able to, start speaking to some of your colleagues and say, look, can I do a letter and sign by all of us to say, look, we feel that we need employee benefits, we need an insurance to help us pay for therapy. Because a lot of, employees help to do your teeth. They help for, if you want glasses, if you have something with your back, or you've got physical health issues, you'll get some adaptations, right? If you've got dyslexia, they will start putting things within your computer to help you. Mental health is part of ensuring employee well-being, ensuring that you can effectively do your work better. It's part of equity. If my mental health issues are not taken into consideration, then I'm not able to be as effective, because there's an area of need that's not being met. Once that area of need has been met, I can work just as good as everybody else, right? However, there is also a part of disclosing. Now, you don't have to. The law says you do not have to disclose your mental health needs. But if you also don't, you can't expect maybe them to support and help as well. So there is that kind of collaboration and trust. But if you don't trust the organization, I would encourage you to find an organization where they are quite transparent in how they support you, because I think it's important to also see first. I'm not going to now say I'm going to just trust that my employees are going to look after my mental health, and they don't talk nothing about it. They do nothing on it. I need to see that is important to you. And then I'm probably going to then feel more comfortable in sharing an interview or saying, can I speak to your manager? I just thought I should share. You ain't got to go into details. You ain't got to talk about your whole mental health history. You can just say, at times I get really, really anxious and I can't even get into work. That's why I'm late sometimes. So if you don't mind, I would love to do hybrid working, because some days when I'm really, really anxious, I will do the work, but I get late, and then you're looking at me, and I'm not trying to be late. I just get so anxious that I miss the train. All of these things happen. And when I get in and I feel like you're frustrated with me, it really affects me being productive. I feel really bad. But if I can use those times where I know I'm going to be late, I just message you and I'll be at home. If there's no meetings and I don't have to be in there physical, I can be at home. I will do the work. It's just that I can't come in physically because of all of these things. Good employer, good manager will go, yeah, because if they want the work done, what is the best environment that we can get the work done? If it is to be at home because that day you're really anxious, and it will set up a train of events that will mean that when you get into work, you're not effective enough, stay at home, be effective, we all win. I ain't got to see you, So it's like sometimes some of these things are like common sense, right? But as they say, sense ain't common nowadays, and even in some of these workplaces. So I would really encourage workplaces to really invest. COVID, the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, life, what's going on, has shown us that we've got to look after our our nuggets, as they call it, right? Because if we don't look after our nuggets, we won't be able to look after every other part of our life and body. And your employees are the life force of your organization. So, and we know absenteeism, mental health needs cost billions to the economy. So if you want to reduce that billions, and if you think about your own company, how much is it costing you that people are taking off sick days, or people are not coming into work, or people are coming into late because of a number of things. But if you put little things in place to ensure to reduce that, to support them, then you're going to have a more effective, productive, and you're going to retain more employees. But directly to the employer, if your company is not providing that for you, you've got to seek that out. And once you feel that you're able to, then I will start looking for somewhere else to go. Because if your employer is not prioritizing your mental well-being, you don't need to be there.
Fab. I mean, there you are. I think I really wish I could have just written down exactly what you said about how to speak to your boss and things, because I think so many people just don't even think about that as an option. They don't even think they can ask for those things. And I loved how you put it, and you gave the arguments for this and explained how to be productive. And then you explained about what things to look for in a workplace. Are they speaking about mental health? Do they care about things like Black Lives Matter? All of these things. I mean, I think a lot of people, listeners, probably noting down exactly that exact script to say to their bosses and things, because I think many people just don't know where to get started on that, and they don't know what to look for. They don't know what are the potential flags, things, and you highlighted a lot of these different pointers of things that people can look for. Well, I guess my question would be about, what would you say then to people who kind of don't think that it's bad enough, quote unquote? I'm doing air quotes, so if anyone's watching the video bit of this that's on YouTube, I'm doing air quotes with this. And a lot of people think that, I have some kind of baggage, should we say, in the colloquial term, or I have some issues with this, with boundaries or whichever, but they don't think it's bad enough to go see somebody, or they don't think it's enough to go talk to somebody, or they want to figure out on their own first before trying to speak to somebody else, or they don't think it's I guess what would you say about that?
I would say, I say things in different ways. I'm trying to think it's another way of me saying this. I would say that if you were, how can I put it? In nearly every other area of our lives, we seek expert help, right? If you're going to get a house, you have maybe 40K saved, right? Before
That would be very nice.
Right, exactly, right. You've saved a 40K for a couple of years, right? But you would probably go to a mortgage broker before starting to put money. Well, you couldn't do it anyways without, without somebody, unless you just, have the money itself. And they might say, you know what, save about 20K more, right? But you wouldn't know that before that, right? You saved 40K, you thought that's, 10, I don't know how much it is, 10, 20% that you need, but you go to a mortgage broker because you think you're ready now, yeah? And they say, oh, you don't have enough actually. So what I'm basically saying is that you don't wait until you're 60 and then you go. You typically start researching, doing something to find out what is it that you need. Because the worst thing is to prepare yourself to go somewhere and you're told you ain't got everything prepared. So likewise, flip it on its head, right? If you feel things are not that bad, right? One, I would just say is, how do you know? Because you don't think it's that bad, right? But everyone else thinks it's that bad. Secondly, yeah, because let me say this, we're not really good. We're really not really good at self-reflecting unless there's a mirror that's usually been held up for us to begin to see. We've got blind spots. Any drivers know, right? If you've driven long enough or you're doing your test, there are blind spots. I haven't hit anybody, thank God. Anyways, let's not talk about that. The point is, I haven't had any major accidents, but I know we've all confidently driven out, looked at all our mirrors, and a cyclist just comes out of nowhere, or somebody just looks, like, I did not see you. Like I looked, I turned my head 360. Blind spots, right? Human beings, we have blind spots. So what I'm saying is, if you feel like things are not that bad, right? That might be the case. Maybe it genuinely is not that bad. Fine. Do you want it to get worse? That's what I would say, right? And how do you know when it really gets worse? Because you're already diminishing your own experience. Things are not that bad because you're doing it in comparison. Because we only say things are not that bad in comparison to others. Because if it's just thinking about ourselves, it's bad. It's bad. Me not having no boundaries is bad. But you'll be going, I don't have no boundary, but that person over there is, or that person over there is, right? We compare. So you're usually doing it because you're comparing yourself to others. And I appreciate that. There's always going to be somebody in a worse of position. Thank the Lord, there is always somebody I ain't in a worse of position. I'll also say from another angle is that, like I said, it's going to get worse. So if you want it to get worse and then get help, then let me tell you the truth, right? It is very hard to undo 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of trauma. So when people come in their 60s, amazing that they've come, but do you know the amount of work that's needed to undo 60 years of their lives of trauma, 60 years of thinking in a certain way?
Yeah.
Let alone if you come earlier, maybe in your 20s, maybe in your 30s, it's still going to take long, but we ain't got to do double the work. It's basically double the work. You want me to do more work? Really? What you're saying to me as a therapist is that you're going to come when you're really, really bad and I've got to do more work to undo this, right? So I would just say that to people, to encourage people, good. I actually think it's good if you don't feel you're that bad, because thank God that not every single person has a traumatic life. It's not trauma Olympics. If you have secure relationships, secure parenting, because sometimes it's like people, because I feel like, to your question, your first question, a lot of people realize they've gone through trauma, right? So what you hear nowadays is trauma. But there are some people that had good enough parents. They had an okay life. And then they go, crap, but I still got issues. But in comparison to that person who was odd, and that person who this, and that person and that, maybe mine is not that great. And that's the negative thing when sometimes we push trauma so much that people that haven't gone through the big T traumas, for example, kind of just feel, you know, maybe what I'm going through isn't really that bad. It's like, it's not really about bad or not bad. If you feel that something is off, if you feel that you can get better in life, why not go? Because what I will say then is, if you want the best quality of life and there's something stopping you from having that, even if it's just 1%, deal with that 1%. It hasn't got to be 10, 20, 80%. 80% is hard, you know. Do you know how hard it is to deal with 80% of trauma? Bruv, I would want to deal with 10% of trauma, mate. Do you know how great that is to know that you only got to deal with this little bit and then you're thriving like that? Because people that have a lot of trauma in therapy, they will tell you it's probably one of the hardest things they have to do. So I would encourage people that haven't got, it's not air quotes, right? Not that bad. Amazing. Go get help, get support, because what it would mean is that you won't need 10, 15 years of psychological therapy. You might need a good 6 months, 12 months to really fine tune and retune your mindset, really just bolster what you are currently doing and lift you up. I think it's an amazing thing. I want to encourage people, because I sometimes feel like the people that don't have trauma feel like they feel bad now because they're like, oh, but I haven't really got trauma. It's like, good. This is good. I won't go in therapy so that our children don't have to have 80% of trauma. They're going to come out with some scratches, but let it be 10 or 20% rather than 80. We don't want 80. We don't, because the world is already to because of 80% of trauma. But imagine if more people in 20, 30, 40 years was like, you know, I didn't really have that bad of a childhood, you know? Oh my God, right? That's what we want. That is what we want. So I'm flipping it on its head to just really say, whether you got 80% of trauma, 20%, 0.5%, if you feel that there's something that's stopping you from being a best version of yourself, present and future, go to therapy. Go get a coach. Get somebody that will hold up a mirror to you, and you can begin that process of reflecting on yourself and dealing with what we call maladaptive behavior. So you can, you know, be present in the moment and deal with things as is rather than deal with things back then.
I love that. That was fantastic. That was a great summary.
A long-winded way, right?
I loved it. And you know, I guess what you're basically saying is the people that have got 5 years of therapy worth of trauma, you know, go to those 5 years, and the people who've got 20 years or you said 60 years worth of trauma of 60 years worth of therapy to go through for their trauma, they can also go to that, and everybody can go and sort themselves out. And you know, even if it is only 5 years worth or 2 years worth of therapy, whatever it is, you know, it's worth doing that so that you can become sort of less maladaptive in the future, whatever issues you're experiencing, because obviously everyone has issues, you know, there's never going to be a universe we're at, but it would be great, like you said, that if we could all get to the stage where everybody on the planet only needs 5 years of therapy and not 30
exactly
years of therapy.
Like only 5% of trauma. Isn't that amazing? So that's, you know, I actually think when I meet people who don't feel like they haven't gone through a lot of trauma, and usually go, oh, actually you have, because you've suppressed it and you've forgotten about it. But when people genuinely feel like they haven't got much issues, I think it's a great thing that you haven't got much issues, but you said you haven't got much, meaning you've got some. If you've got no issues, that's a different, right? And that's probably impossible unless you're dead. So you've probably got issues. So I always say then look forward, right? Because therapy a lot of time is dealing with the past, right? To help you in the present and the future. So if you feel like you haven't got much behind, you haven't got much baggage, then what have you got that's stopping you from going forward? See in that way. That's why if it's not therapy, it could be really good coaching, right? So I'm not always saying you've got to have therapy. Maybe you need a really good coach. But if you are not where you think you need to be, then you need somebody to support you in that process. You can't do it on your own, because if you could do it on your own, you would have gotten there already. That's why I say it. So the whole idea, if you can do it on your own, why is it taking that long to sort it out then? Like, if you can do it on your own, sort it out. If you're not sorting it out, then you need help.
I'll go through life with taking no advice from nobody. I mean, it's not going to work, is it? Like you said, if you were going to be able to sort it out, then we would have all been able to reflect on ourselves and magically all sorted out our own issues and sorted out all our own personality problems and everything.
Exactly,
But
right.
it's
Relationship
not
would be perfect, and
Exactly.
relationship would be perfect. Probably no poverty. The world would be cured of hunger. All of the good stuff. But that ain't the case, right? Really. So yeah.
We'd all say what we mean. We wouldn't say anything passive aggressively. We'd all be like totally intentional about everything. We
Exactly.
just come out and say it like I was feeling hurt instead of just play some weird game with each other. Yeah.
Exactly.
I wonder what that would be like. It'd be a very like short TV show, wouldn't it?
Yeah, a nice utopia.
Yeah, I think it would definitely be very different. Yeah, so we're just about to come to the end now with the podcast and things. And I guess one of the things as well I wanted to touch on a little bit just before we end was about I know that there's many like free resources out there and things. We've spoken as well about like getting started and things. And especially I know obviously at the moment it's going to be quite difficult with the recession and things, so everybody's starting. I don't know if you had any sort of advice about kind of is it still worth using free resources that are out there, or is it worth even just like starting with friends, even if maybe therapy is something in your budget, or if maybe you can only afford a session once a month? What would be your recommendation with that?
So I'm going to be controversial because I really do believe in that. I think, right, and I'm not saying, I always have to say, I'm not saying, but if I was like, I'm a business coach. So when people tell me they ain't got money, I'm saying, find money. I started business. I took out a loan, I borrowed from my fellowship. Most businesses seek out investment. I would say to a degree, because some people go into their overdrafts for holidays, you go into a credit card for things, right? I'm being mindful, but I would say that, my service is quite affordable. There are some really affordable services, right? When I say affordable, £30, and that to some people it is still expensive. I do appreciate that. But most therapists are £50, £60 minimum per session. That's 200 plus, a month. That is quite expensive for a lot of people. So mine is £120 a month, and some are even cheaper than that. And obviously on the NHS it's free. I sometimes say, how willing are you to really seek your mental well-being? I've known people go and using their credit card to support themselves, because in then supporting themselves, they get out of their rump, they get a job, and then they pay off their credit card, and then they start paying their therapy from their actual employment. So I'm not saying get into debt to seek your mental well-being, but we get into debt because we become impulsive buyers. We get into debt because we've got addictive personalities. We get into debt for many reasons, and sometimes there is good debt and bad debt. And I think therapy and mental well-being is actually a good debt. I know people going into debt to do their teeth. So again, I'm not just trying to encourage people to go into debt, but I sometimes think the excuse, and sometimes it's a legitimate reason, but the excuse of that we don't have enough money, sometimes it's more to do, we don't value it enough to say, what can I cut? Sometimes it's a genuine thing of what can I cut in my life for 3 months or 6 months to say that £30, that 40 quid that I normally spend. Because I literally spent 40 quid yesterday on Turkish food. Right.
I mean, that's great. Turkish food is really nice.
Yeah, I love it, right? But let's say I didn't do that. That's an extra £40 I could have spent. If I had an issue with, oh my God, I don't know if I can afford therapy for 1 week. So I would balance that. However, there are people in situations that look, they cannot afford therapy at all. I totally get it. You're on benefits, you're a single mother. I'm just giving like an example of that. There, the NHS, there's some mind services, local minds that are free that you can kind of go to. There are local services. If you literally just write low cost, LOW cost counselling, not in every area of the UK, but in some areas of the UK, you will find services that are extremely inexpensive to get help. Again, it might only be a couple of weeks, it only might be X amount of sessions, but you can access some therapy at a very low cost or free on the NHS as well. But I would also encourage people that, look, if you really need to get help and you have access to a credit card and you know you can pay at the end of the month, but it's not within your main budget, I would actually encourage to go into it, because it's actually for your benefit, because in doing that, you enable your mental health and mental well-being. You've invested in yourself, and you will pay that off. You eventually pay that off, but it's not a bad debt. It's actually a good debt. So again, I do put a caveat to that. I'm not encouraging anyone to get into debt, but as people would say, if you've got a business idea and you want to fund it, seek out a loan, seek out investment. I would say, if you want good mental well-being and you are able to somewhat afford it, you're not constrained in such a way where you just have no money at all, I would consider, doing certain things to make sure you can afford it, because it's for your future. It's for not only your future, it's for your family's future. Because if you've got poor mental well-being, if you are struggling your mental health, you're impacting those around you. So other people are suffering. It's not just you. It's not, you're not an island. So I would say it is for your life. Mental health treatment saves lives, literally. So I want your life to be saved. So sometimes you've got to fork out, go into an overdraft, go into your credit card to say, I need to make sure that my nugget, I don't want to not be here again. I don't want to continue being in a dark room, I don't want to harm myself. These are the things. So I've got to put it into perspective. And what is a couple £100 in debt to make sure that my mental well-being is good? But yeah, there's free resources out there. Friends, I would be, I think I'd be careful, but I would say that if you have a trustworthy friend to talk to, even a trustworthy friend to even borrow you money. Look, we need some friends out here. Some of us friends, I may not be the best person to talk to, but here's £100, because a lot of people have done that in my service, have sponsored people to go therapy. That's a good friend. So
Wow.
you're the kind of good friend that might say, look, I'll pay for therapy fee for 3 months. I can afford it. I can pay £100-something a month for 3 months. That's £300 to support you, right? That's a good birthday present. So don't get me that. Give me therapy for my birthday, for Christmas, for my anniversary.
Wow, yeah, experience present.
Yes, that's saving my life present. Yeah, that is making sure my mental well-being is good enough so that I can be here for my children and for my family, for my partner. That is the present that I want. So yeah, if you want to say go to friends, friend, can you sponsor me for therapy, please? That would be great.
Okay, here's my Monzo details in the description.
Exactly.
And then... Fantastic. I mean, I think that you summarized it really well, and then you were saying that people, it's not necessarily that, obviously there's many different circumstances and there's many options available for different needs and different levels. I know that there's charities, for example, that you just pay what you can, and sometimes if you can't pay anything, you don't pay anything at all, and there's many ones that are free as well. But I think what you were saying is that we need to really see this as a focus. I see this as an investment for people that are able to, and the people who are able to go and things. And I guess in the same way that some people invest in a gym membership, or maybe different levels, they might invest in like a sports bra, or a pair of trainers. Maybe they don't go to the gym, but they invest in some shoes so they can go running. Whatever the level is, I think what you were saying was to invest in it and to invest in your mental health and see it as a vital part of well-being, of leading a successful life.
100%. Yeah, definitely. Exactly. And the caveat is that everything that is usually low cost and free has a time limit. So whereas most people need more than 6, 12, anything that you want that's going to be long term, you're going to have to pay for. And that's the reason why I'm saying that once you do the 6, the 12, the 10 sessions, even the 16, sometimes you even get 24 sessions. But after that, 24 6 months, after that, you're like, crap, I need this. You've got to think, okay, I need to make an investment. And yes, it might be a temporary detriment, like financially, for the long-term benefit, both financially, emotionally, physically, mentally.
Well, there we are. Right from the therapist's mouth themselves.
Pat.
Thank you so much for being on today. I really loved our discussion today. I mean, I was looking forward to it anyway, because it was something I'm interested in as well. I just wanted to ask for our listeners, where can people find you? How can they contact you? All the information about that.
Okay, yes. So if I work across the whole idea of mental health and leadership. So if you as an employee were like, oh my God, I love this, I would love your company to work in my company, or you're in HR, or you're whoever, like your decision maker, Ngozi Cadmus, NGOZICADMUS, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. That's probably the best place to come to me, because when you come to me, you can go into different routes. So if you want, as an individual, private therapy, then go there, go to Frontline Therapists via Ngozi Cadmus. If you want to speak to myself, then my team will message me, and my team will get back to you, and we can begin a conversation about how I can support you, your department, your company, in terms of their mental well-being, or in terms of the lack of representation of Black and Asian individuals within the company as well. So yeah, they can get to me, NGOZICADMUS, Ngozi Cadmus, on all social media platforms.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking your time to be here today to speak with our listeners and just share all of your little pearls of wisdom.
Hopefully they've been pearls, not big dragon nuts.
I think dragon nuts could be nice as well. So it depends on what flavor what kind of taste you want. So thanks. Thank you, listeners, for listening, and we'll speak to you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support this podcast, please share it with others and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Keep up to date with what we do at Diversifying Group at diversifying.com, or follow us on social media at Diversifying Group. See you next time.